Hey everybody, and welcome to the equipment video. I don't think this will take super long, but there are some fun things to go over and some mechanics to learn. A lot of it has to do with adventuring and combat. So some of the stuff will be double dipping into a couple of videos we'll do in the future. However, I'm excited for this one. It's kind of fun. I say that with all of these videos, don't I? Oh well. That being said, let's dive on in. If you're with us in the Player's Handbook, we are in Chapter 5, titled Equipment, and it starts on page 143. And before it jumps into anything, it starts talking about money, because apparently money is important to some people. It breaks it down into a bunch of different ways that you can handle currency. Perhaps there's a lot of bartering. Most of this is actually, I think, for the Dungeon Master. Maybe you will expect a little bit of this as a player. Who knows? I think a lot of it will depend on where your character is in the adventuring world. If they're on an outskirts town, money might not be the most effective way of actually trading and getting what you want. So you might have to trade in valuable goods, or you might find certain things in the dungeons that you can bring back and sell, like a valuable keg of ale. Who knows? Local bar might pay a lot of money for that, or provide you with free stay while you're there. That'd be kind of neat. And anyone with high charisma can always barter for a better deal. And depending on the role, it might end up hilariously backfiring. And that's D&D, folks. All right, that's it. We'll call it there. That's D&D. I'm so weird. However, if you find yourself in the position of using coinage, the game breaks it down into pretty much what the coins are made of. Copper coins are of the lowest value, and if you get 10 of those, it's worth 1 silver. 10 silver is worth 1 gold, and 10 gold is worth 1 platinum. So if you have 1 platinum piece, that's 1,000 copper pieces. The book does go into some detail as to what currency looks like and how you spend it, or what a lifestyle choice would be, or how much money you would expect to pay in a day depending on the lifestyle choice that you choose. The wealthier the lifestyle, the more money you'll pay. And a lot of this currency you're going to find while adventuring. Those dungeons aren't going to loot themselves. That's your job. If you take a look in the book, on that first page of equipment, it talks about how a silver is a half day's wage for a common folk. So perhaps that puts a couple of things into perspective for you. So if you're a basic laborer, you can expect to make 2 silver in a day. So if you happen upon a dungeon and find 200 gold pieces, whoa, you're set for a long time. And what can you do with that money, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. In this video, I'm breaking equipment down into 5 lovely categories, and money allows you to do just about anything with any and all of them. The last one may be less so, however, we'll get there when the time comes. But in order, we'll be talking armor, weapons, adventuring gear, tools, and magic items. So let's start with number 1. Armor in D&D has everything to do with determining what your armor class is going to be. We call this AC for short. The only thing that armor class is really good for is determining whether someone trying to attack you lands the hit or not, dealing any damage. The higher your armor class, the more difficult you are to hit. Be that because the armor you're wearing is thick, or you happen to be really dexterous and capable of dodging out of the way. Regardless of how you get to this number of armor class, your AC is incredibly important for keeping you alive. Armor is broken down into 4 different categories. The first 3 have everything to do with what you're wearing, and the 4th is just the kind of shield that you're wearing, or not wearing, whether you choose to use one. There are pros and cons to using a shield. There are also pros and cons to every type of armor you can wear. There are 3 different kinds of armor that you wear on your body. First up on the list is light armor. Light armor would be armor that doesn't really wear a whole lot, likely going to be made of leather, and there are 3 kinds that the book spells out for you. The first is padded armor. Don't waste your time. It's garbage, because it's going to cause you disadvantage on any stealth checks while wearing light armor. That sucks. Now that's something we will revisit with some of the medium armors and all of the heavy armors, but for now, essentially what it means is it makes it difficult for you to move around sneakily enough in order to avoid being detected. Perhaps it's noisier, or you're not as nimble as what you could be, and so you might find yourself not able to stretch or dodge out of the way of something and create a sound, or perhaps the armor is more reflective in the moonlight. All of that comes into play when it comes to understanding the disadvantage that certain armors can give you while trying to make stealth checks. And typically speaking, light armored individuals are going to be very high dex, which means they're going to be a little bit better at stealthing than others. So don't ever put on padded armor. Dear God, I beg of you, don't ever put on padded armor. Instead, you should be choosing between leather or studded leather. There's no reason to pick leather over studded leather, other than it's pretty much what you'll start with and gain studded leather later, mostly because of the cost. But any kind of armor that you wear is going to give you a base number, and then you get to add your dexterity modifier to that base. In the case of light armor, you get to add your whole dexterity modifier. So if you roll a high dex character, someone with an 18 or a 20, that's going to be a +4 or +5. Now, typically speaking, if you're not wearing armor, your base AC is 10 plus your dexterity modifier. So again, that person with an 18 in dexterity is going to have a natural AC of 14 when they're not wearing armor. But you put them in leather armor, and that base is no longer 10, but 11. 11 plus 4 would then be 15. 15 is higher than 14, so you're just that much more likely to be missed by an enemy than hit. And if we're talking in terms of math and statistics, a 20-sided dice, if you're talking in percentiles, 100% divided by 20, means that every number higher is going to be a 5% change in likeliness to hit or not hit. Studded leather increases to a base of 12 plus your dexterity modifier. So you'd be looking at an AC of 16 rather than 14. That's 10% less likely to be hit. Again, depending on what the creature's plus to hit is, but we'll cover that in weapons. Medium armor offers a better base than light armor in terms of what you're adding your dexterity modifier to. However, you only get to add 2 of your dexterity modifier. So that 18 dexterity character doesn't get to add 4, they add 2 if they choose to don medium armor. This is especially useful for someone who is not prioritizing dexterity as their main stat. Perhaps you only have a 14 or 15 dexterity. Medium armor is going to be an excellent choice for you. However, we have to be careful too, because with certain medium armors, we have a higher chance of running into disadvantage while stealthing. Your basic medium armor is going to be hide, which is a 12 base, and then adding 2 of your dexterity modifier, if you have 2 or higher, for a total of 14. Now, that's not great, but again, that's the lowest you can go in terms of cost and effectiveness. The highest is half plate, which gives you a base of 15. If you're adding 2 from your dexterity modifier there, that puts you at 17. That's pretty good. That would be the same as a 20 dexterity character wearing studded leather, which is as high as your character can reach dexterity-wise without the use of magic or magical items. So let that bake your think noodle. However, with half plate, you are going to be at disadvantage on your stealth checks. It's a little noisier, and again, the moon might reflect off of it in the middle of the night, so it's going to be more likely that you do not succeed your stealth checks. You might want to let your stealthier folk that are wearing their light armors go first. Do their recon, and then come back and inform you what you need to do as a group. But that's just me. Sometimes you don't have a choice. That's where the rolls get fun. Then we move on to heavy armor. Now, heavy armor is interesting because it allows you no pluses from your dexterity modifier. But the advantage of wearing heavy armor is that if you have a negative dexterity score, that does not apply to your armor class. So say you decided to make dexterity your dump stat. Perhaps you're playing a paladin and you don't need any dexterity. And you have a 7 or an 8. A -2, -1. If you're not wearing armor, your AC is going to be 10 minus your dexterity modifier in that case. So a natural AC of 8 or 9, ouch. You're going to get hit pretty often. But that paladin you then clad in heavy armor, maybe full plate, which is the best that money can buy you, your AC jumps to 18. And that's where it stays. It doesn't get a minus because of your dexterity modifier. Now, I should mention, all heavy armor puts you at disadvantage on stealth checks. Your heavy armor wearing folks are pretty much going to suffer at stealth regardless of where they are. So keep that in mind when it comes to adventuring in the dungeon. If you want to know what's ahead, scout, recon, have your stealthy players go and do what they do best. They're going to feel awesome, and you're going to protect yourselves at the same time. But in those tricky circumstances, when you don't have a whole lot of options in terms of scouting ahead, get ready for some fun times. And it's probably going to be roll initiative. That's the thing that we say when we start combat. An interesting thing to add on to the heavy armor discussion is that some heavy armors require a minimum strength score in order to be worn. If your strength score is not high enough, then your base move speed is actually going to be reduced by 10 feet per round, unless you're a dwarf, which is one of the racial benefits that we talked about in the races video. Theirs is going to remain 25 feet regardless of their strength score. Pretty awesome stuff. You might remember we've talked about proficiency a number of times when it comes to skill checks and saving throws and how you use weapons. Well, your character has proficiencies with armor as well, based on the class that you choose. If your character chooses to wear a piece of armor that they're not proficient with, get ready. You're going to have disadvantage on ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls made while you're wearing that kind of armor. That's pretty much every single roll in the game that uses your d20. So unless you have no choice, I highly recommend that you stick to the armor that you're trained in using. And if that's not the kind of armor you want, don't fret. We can still get proficiency in those armors later on in the game. We'll talk about that in the feats video. We might do that next, who knows? I do have an idea. A friend of mine reached out, said that we should totally do a collab on actually building a character and showing you how it's done. I'm all for it. That sounds awesome. So expect that in the near future, and we probably will go over some of that stuff then. But all of that has to do with your character leveling up, and we haven't talked a whole lot about that yet. We're kind of just getting you ready to build your character. And now that we have all the character design down in terms of who they are, where they come from, and what they do, now it's good for us to fill out their character sheet and understanding what they have. Which brings us to shields, the last piece of armor you could attach to your body. Shields just give you a +2 to your AC, but they do require require you to use a spare hand in order to protect yourself. And that +2 can stack on top of any kind of armor that you're wearing, so long as you have proficiency with shields. So if you choose to go the swashbuckler route and find yourself wearing studded leather and a dexterity score of 18, you're going to be looking at a base 12 +4 +2. That 18 AC is pretty decent. And if you're that knight in shining armor wearing full plate mail, that's 18 plus the 2 from a shield, putting you at 20 for your total AC. And that's definitely hard to hit. Now, if you remember in the classes video, barbarians and monks do have the option to forego armor anyway and get to use, if they're a barbarian, their constitution modifier plus their dexterity modifier, or if you're a monk, their dexterity modifier and their wisdom modifier. That only happens if they're not wearing armor, and both of those things are highly recommended. To not have to don and doff armor, that's pretty cool. If you get ambushed in the middle of the night, you're not going to take the allotted time given in the book to put on your heavy armor, which is 10 minutes, by the way. Each round of combat is 6 seconds. So that's 100 rounds of combat that you're going to miss out on. That combat is going to be long over by the time you get your armor on. For barbarians and monks, you get to jump right in without having to worry about it. That's kind of awesome. Now, why would we have armor if we didn't have weapons? Well, we wouldn't. Let's talk about weapons. Melee weapons pretty much have everything to do with the kind of damage you do when you strike an enemy in combat. That's really all they do. However, they go into more depth than the armor in understanding what a weapon can be used for and what advantages there are to choosing your weapon. There are both different types of damages done with weapons. The basic 3 are bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing. Bludgeoning being hammers or clubs, slashing being swords and axes, and piercing being spears and bows, or all the weapons that could be associated with those 3 types of damage. And choosing your weapon has everything to do with choosing the damage die that you're going to deal when you strike or land your hit. Now, in order to make that hit land, you're going to take the appropriate modifier, which in most cases is going to be strength, but with finesse weapons, you get to use dexterity instead. A weapon being finesse is known as a weapon property, and there are quite a few of them. We'll go over them here so that you understand what you're getting yourself into. But to return to the point, you're going to use your base modifier, strength or dexterity if it's a finesse weapon, your proficiency if you're trained in that weapon, on top of the d20 roll. And if that roll beats the armor class or AC of the creature, you get to land your hit and deal damage. See, it all connects. But let's go ahead and talk about the weapon properties real quick. First on the list is ammunition. If you're using a bow or a crossbow or a dart blower or darts themselves, javelins, a sling, all of these things are going to require you to have ammunition. A bow without an arrow is kind of just a staff, and even then a bad one. I don't recommend hitting someone with your bow. That's actually an improvised weapon, and you're not going to be proficient in that swing. But should you have the ammunition, that bow is going to be a lot more lethal. Once you're out of ammunition, you can no longer use that weapon. So make sure that you're restocking your arrows or your bolts for your crossbow while you're in town, or looking for more among your enemies after a combat. It's always good to make sure you have what you need in order to continue fighting. Next on the list is finesse, and we've already talked about finesse a little bit, but for a finesse weapon, you can choose to use either your strength or your dexterity modifier. So your monks, your rogues, your rangers, or your dex-based fighters are likely going to pick finesse weapons like rapiers, short swords, daggers, because they're going to be able to deal more damage and be more effective in hitting than using a longsword. So be on the look for the finesse tag if you are going to be a dex-based character. Or a weapon could be heavy. Heavy weapons mean that small creatures are going to be at disadvantage while using those weapons. So halflings and gnomes are going to have a hard time wielding a longbow. Actually, that's kind of funny when you think about it. Or a great axe, or a great sword, a halberd. Those are super heavy weapons. However, there is a way around this. I'll cover it now, but you would find this in the magical equipment section, talking about a weapon being made of mithril. Mithril allows for a weapon to be considered not heavy if it is normally a heavy weapon. Because the material is so light, a halfling or a gnome could wield a mithril-made greatsword, which is actually pretty cool when you think about it. So there are plenty of options for your characters out there. Maybe that's what your halfling desires, is to learn how to wield a longbow made of a lighter density wood that allows them still the awesome capabilities of a longbow without sacrificing any of the damage. Or a greatsword, or great axe, whatever their preference might be. A weapon might be light instead. Light and finesse are two different things. A weapon being light has everything to do with two-weapon fighting, which unfortunately in D&D 5e is not a great way of going. Most of the benefits of two-weapon fighting, or having a weapon in each hand, a sword in each hand, or an axe in each hand, is going to be you get an extra attack. Now, if the weapon in your offhand, say you're right-handed and you have a weapon in your left hand. If that weapon is light, you still get to apply your damage modifier. Otherwise, you normally would not. There is a feat to counteract that, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. So back to my point, light weapons and two-weapon fighting is an early game trade-off that does not scale well into the mid-game or late-game sections and areas of your campaign, because that extra attack is also going to be eating up your bonus action. And at high level of play, you're going to have a lot better bonus action options than swinging your weapon one more time. But if you're playing a low-level campaign that isn't going to get past 5th or 6th level, go for it. That extra attack can be really clutch. Next up is loading. This would have to do with crossbows. A crossbow with a loading feature, that's all of them, means that you can only fire once per round, regardless of how many attacks you get with that crossbow, due to the nature of having to pull the crossbow and ready the next bolt. Crossbows are heavy. I didn't realize how heavy until I got one for hunting. Holy smokes, it takes a long time. But don't lose heart. There's also a feat that can counteract that and allow you to take multiple shots with your crossbow every turn. But we'll get to that with the feats episode. Haha. Next up is range. Ranged weapons are going to be beneficial. You don't need to have everybody up in the thick of things. Someone might want to stay back and use that longbow, or shortbow, crossbow, javelins, whatever their preference. Ranged weapons have 2 numbers attached to them. The first is the standard range of that weapon, and any attacks made within that amount of feet are going to be made regularly. The second number allows the maximum range, but any range higher than the first number up to that maximum number of the second means that any attack you make is going to be at disadvantage. The farther the shot, the more difficult it is to land. And guess what? There's a feat for that too. Haha, I'm teasing you so hard. Next up are reach weapons. Reach weapons allow you to make an attack at 1 extra square away from yourself than normal. Most melee weapons are going to be 5-foot range. However, with a reach weapon, like a polearm, which could be a halberd or a glaive, you get to attack at 10 feet instead of 5. Now, there's some interesting combat tactics that can come into play with this kind of an advantage. And yes, there's a feat that empowers your polearm weapons too. It's actually probably the most broken feat when it comes to martial combat, but again, we'll talk about that next time. Next up would be the special trait. There are only 2 weapons that use special traits, and it's everything to do with that weapon specifically. And those 2 weapons are the lance and the net. A lance is going to be best used from horseback. If you're making a 5-foot melee attack with a lance, you're doing so at disadvantage. But if you're attacking from horseback, you get to make that attack normally, and it's gonna hurt. A net doesn't really do damage, but allows you to restrain your foe in combat. So it follows a couple of different combat rules, and you can read all of those under the item description in the equipment chapter. So those are the only 2 that follow special rules or conditions, hence the special tag. Next up is thrown. Thrown weapons are ranged weapons that can be used in melee, but also have the ability to be thrown well. This would be something like javelins, daggers, hand axes. And these 2 follow the ranged rules, with the first number being the normal range at which you can throw it just fine, and the second number that you can throw maximum distance, but at disadvantage after that first number. And these weapons are going to follow either the strength or the finesse rules, as they are primarily melee weapons, whereas ranged weapons are only going to focus on dexterity, your hand-eye coordination in this case, for your ranged weapons like a bow. A dagger is counted as a finesse weapon, so you can use your dex there, but a hand axe is all about how hard you can throw. So your hand axe is actually going to be a strength roll for your throw. Up next is two-handed. A two-handed weapon requires you to use it with 2 hands, which means that you will not be able to wear a shield while you're holding that weapon. This would be something like a greatsword, a great axe, a polearm like a glaive or a halberd. And the idea behind this is that you're going to be rolling much higher damage dice with these weapons rather than the smaller weapons that would allow you to hold a shield at the same time. And lastly, we have the versatile trait. Versatile weapons would be something like a longsword or a battle axe. You can wield them with 1 hand and use a shield. However, if you do choose to use 2 hands with this weapon, you increase the damage die by 1 increment. So whereas normally your longsword would be 1d8 of damage, if you're using 2 hands instead of 1, this would become a 1d10. This is kind of nice depending on how you want to build your character. The versatile tag allows for versatile fighting. And then it gets into improvised weapons. Remember when I talked about hitting someone with your bow? You're not using that weapon for its intended use. Or maybe you're using something for a weapon that was never meant to be a weapon at all, like a table leg, a frying pan, or as the book says, a dead goblin. If you pick up that goblin and smack another goblin with it, that's an improvised weapon. That's hilarious, but it's improvised. Your character does not normally have proficiency with improvised weapons, but guess what? There's a feat for that. An improvised weapon is going to be a d4 of damage plus the relevant modifier, which in most cases is going to be strength. So sure, if you want to use dead goblins as your weapon of choice, then make sure you pick up the Tavern Brawler feat early on, and off you go to the races. You're only going to be dealing a d4 of damage plus your strength modifier, so have fun. On page 149, it actually breaks everything down into a nice little table here for you to understand, wow, that weapon does this. Cool, that weapon has that kind of damage dice. Awesome, my character is so cool. That's the whole point. Next on our list is adventuring gear. You don't go camping without packing first, right? Well, you don't go diving into a dungeon without making sure you have everything you need to both survive the journey there and while you're in the dungeon itself. This might be a bedroll, rations, some rope, a tent, medicine, torches, something to light the torches with, a water flask. All of these things are going to be important for keeping your character alive on the way there. It's not something that normally comes into play a whole lot. Your dungeon master might require them in certain circumstances, and it's not going to make sense for your character to leave without them. So make sure you're listening to your dungeon master when he says you have to pay a certain amount of gold or silver in order to restock all of your supplies. It's not going to take a lot of time to do. You'll be back in the adventure at no time. I will say, though, for those who pay attention, adventuring gear becomes incredibly helpful in the right circumstances. The players of mine that have focused a lot on making sure they understood everything in their inventory have been ready for just about every challenge I've thrown at them. If your character needs a quick getaway and has rope, and they know that they have rope, they're going to have a different set of options to them than someone who never packed rope in the first place, if rope is something they can use. All of this comes down to your creativity as a player and your ability to solve problems quickly and efficiently. Have fun with that. Some of my most enjoyable moments at the table have been when my players have been really creative in figuring out how to use their equipment that normally doesn't do certain things to try something new. Fourth on the list are tools. Tools have everything to do with how your character either maintains their adventuring gear or provides income for daily living. If your character is a smith, then he's going to be using smithing tools to make armor and weapons, or help craft things for the local town. Horseshoes, farming tools, equipment. All of that stuff is going to be incredibly useful to a town, and they're going to pay their smith well in order to keep the equipment coming. So if your character is proficient with smith's tools, he'll have extra things he can do in periods of downtime when the party isn't out adventuring together. Now, there's a lot of them to choose from here, that's for sure. And as the book explains, in period of downtime, you can use the tools that you're proficient with to provide a 1 gold per day kind of lifestyle. And you'll be able to do so without having to use any of your gold. It's a nice way of making sure your character doesn't go broke when they're not adventuring. And for our extra creative characters out there, yeah, you can use them to make weapons if you're smithing. Or alchemist tools to create certain kinds of magical potions that might be beneficial to you while you're adventuring. To our herbalists, yeah, let's try and make some health potions. That sounds awesome. You can sell them or you can use them. Great. Takes time, but it's great. Or for those who like to dabble in the assassinous arts of poison, there's tools for those too. And all of these, your dungeon master is likely going to have a fun time exploring with you. So take advantage of it. This again allows for some incredible creativity, and if you're reading these sections of the book, you're going to get a lot of ideas on how you can build your character, or maybe another character once you're done with this one. Let that creativity be a wonderful thing that propels you into your next adventure for many adventures to come. The book then does talk about mounts and other kinds of barding and equipment and vehicles. That's not something we need to pay a whole lot of attention to. Most of that is actually just going to be for your dungeon master. But if it's interesting to you, please dive on in and read. The thing I'll cover here lastly would be magical items. Now, a magical item could be any of the aforementioned categories: armor, weapons, adventuring gear, or tools. And each one is going to have different options that really, at their base, change the rules for your character and how they interact with the world around them. A magical weapon is going to offer you better damage rolls most of the time, be it an additional +1 on top of whatever your rolls are. That would be both to attack and damage. Or perhaps it's a flame tongue and lights on fire, allowing you to deal extra fire damage whenever you land a hit. They change the rules and allow your character some really awesome things that make them stand out in the world. And a good dungeon master is going to know that there are certain items that are going to do well for your party. Enjoy the process. Can I just do an aside note here? Try to distribute items that are going to be effective and beneficial for the entire party. I know that there might be some magical item that looks super fun and might be exactly what you've wanted to do, but is better suited for another character at your table. Try and understand that if their character can make the best use of that, it's going to go well for you and the rest of your party. And on the occasion that they find an item that they really want but is going to be better suited to you, hopefully they remember that, hey, you did this awesome thing for me, here you go, have fun. But magic items are a blast, and I hope that you enjoy discovering them and using them in your own games as your dungeon master rewards you for challenging the boss and defeating them and looting their hoard, or for saving the town and having a local wealthy individual thank you personally by giving you an heirloom from his family fortune. Who knows? How you come into these magical items will be between you and the dungeon master and your group, but I promise you, you'll have a lot of fun using them in your campaigns. All right, I think that's that's just about everything. I think we've covered equipment pretty well. If I haven't and have missed something, please let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, what are your favorite weapons to use? Or what kind of armor do you think you would probably wear in real life? Are you low dex and need heavy armor for protection? Or are you pretty nimble and would probably want to use lighter armor? Or are you like me and might need a mix of both? What magical items might sound fun for you to use? Or what kind of adventuring tools do you think might be beneficial that we might not normally think of as you read through the adventure tool list? I'd love to connect with all of that. As always, I'm incredibly grateful that you're here. Thank you so much for coming along on this ride with me. We're well over halfway, I think, through the Learning D&D video series here, and yeah, I'm still open to hearing from you guys what it is that you would want to talk about next. Anyways, as we're moving forward, I'm excited about what the future holds. And just want to say thank you for being along for the ride. Hopefully I have an announcement for you in the upcoming weeks, but until then, adventure is calling. Are you listening?